Hello fellow AGD coders, and welcome to another video. And in this video I'm going to be showing you how to convert a complete game from AGD4.6 to AGDX, the current version. And I've created a couple of tools to make it relatively easy and straightforward to do. It was quite a hassle, but now it's not that tricky. So let's take a look at each step and how we go about it. So what I've done here is I've got AGDX4. AGD, I should say, 4.6 open, and I've got Andrew Van Beck's game, which is Dead Flesh Boy, and so I'm going to look at how to convert this over to AGDX. And as I said, I'm sure you know how to open AGD4.6 and load a game into it, so we won't go into that here. We'll assume that you have your game on that format. So as you can see, here's the game, and it is running fine, of course, as you would expect. And so we've got to now think about how we can first of all export all of the data. So in order to be nice and organized, the first thing I recommend that you do is create a folder and give it a name for the files that you're going to be working on. And in that folder you should put these three files, which I'll make available to download. There are two binaries and one poke. So there are three different files here that we're going to use to basically save off our data, get the information we need, and convert some of the information as well. So the first thing we'll do before we do anything else then is we'll save off the font, because we're going to be loading code into the character set. So here's the font, and we'll save it off, and so we'll go to export. We're using Spectaculator here, and you should use Spectaculator, by the way, because there's a feature that is required for this. So yeah, so here you go. Probably you've saved a font before, 31232 768, and we'll call it, in this case, dfb font.bin. Okay, so that's our font saved. That's step one. Now the next thing that we want to do is we're going to load some code into the character set, which we're going to run, which will give us information about the data that we need. So with the character set open this file called show pointers and load it in at 31704. Okay, now once that's loaded in, you then go to the poke file, open the poke file, and highlight all 7 of these pokes here, like so, and that's going to activate the code in the menu. So now all we have to do is go back to the menu, and there, as if by magic, is suddenly a huge amount of information about the game. So this data, of course, you'll be familiar with if you've used AGDX. It tells you about the locations of all the different bits and pieces of information. So if you only want to export one type or one piece of information, say for example the screen data, or maybe the sounds, or whatever you want, you can do that. But we're not going to do that. We're going to look at exporting everything here. So there are basically 3 or 4 different pieces of information that we're going to extract. We're going to start with the sprites. Now the thing is, with AGDX, or rather with AGD I should say, there is a bug. It's been patched in AGDX where if you delete data, sometimes it doesn't clear up the data, and you end up with extra space that is used, which wasn't necessary. So rather than take this number here, because we want to get rid of that unused space if we can, we need to calculate what this actual frame space should be. So we start with this number here, 88. That's the number of the frames, and this number here, 17, is the number of the sprites. And the total data should be the number of frames multiplied by 128 plus the total number of sprites times 2. So that would be 88 times 128, and then we add 17 twice, which is 34. So 11298 is the actual size of the sprite data. So we can see here that there's about 100 bytes or so maybe being used, which is not necessary. So that's the actual number we'll need, so we'll keep that and we'll make a note of that. So yeah, to export the sprites then, all we have to do is, again, go to export and choose here 36924 and just remind ourselves there, yep, 11298. So yeah, don't use the number on the screen because that's the wasted data possibly. That's the correct number to use that by that calculation. So we'll save this off now and we'll call it dfb sprites.bin. Okay, so that's our sprites done, and those can be loaded in to AGD quite easily if that's all you want. But what we really want to do here, of course, is to get the whole game. So there are a couple of other things now that we want to do before we save the main data. One of them to think about is the jump table, and if I wanted to, I would export the jump table here at 36217 20, and here I'm actually also going to export the map, which is at 36284. So yep, there we go. We'll save the map at 36284, and I'm not actually saving the jump table here because it's not needed. I know that the jump table isn't used in this game. I can look at it there and I can see it's basically the same jump table as the default, so I don't need to do that. I can skip that step. If your game has a custom jump table, then save the binary at 36217 in this case, and the size of that is 20. Okay, so that's the jump table done and the map is done. And so the rest of the data, you'll see this number down here. That's the number which tells us the total size of all of the rest of the data, apart from the sprite data, which we've separated because of that potential memory saving. So as you can see here, it starts from the address of the block data up here, and it goes all the way down to the event data. So this number here, 48350 and 11856, that's the total data that we're going to save off. However, before we do that, we need to make note of a few bits of information about various things that we need to set up. Make a note first of all of the window area so that you can set up the window to be correct. In this case I know that it's 32 by 23. It's a full size window, so make a note of that because you'll need to set that up later. And additionally, we're going to now look at counting through the number of blocks that we have, the number of screens, and so on. So I've created a notepad file there so I can make a note of these, and let me just see here. You can see here we've got 203 blocks. In fact, if you look at the data there, you can see 2030, so divide it by 10, that tells you how many blocks. So we know there's 203. Just make a note there so that I remember. Okay, I'll probably remember, but it's always good to make a note. Now let's check how many screens we've got. And we can see here there are 17 screens in total. Okay, so we'll write that down. And there are also 10 sounds. So I'll write that down as well. Just a second. I've already checked this, but just double check. There you go. So it's actually 11 sounds, yeah, not 10. So okay, so we need to make 11 sounds. Of course, if you don't use sound in your game, then you don't need to worry too much about this, but you should still write the number down for the data, size of the data, so that it matches. If you've got one sound, make sure that you have one sound in the AGDX version as well. The numbers have to all match up basically, so we still need to make sure that they match, but normally if you don't use sounds they'll just be 1. And the number of messages in this case, I know that it's actually only 4. So that's pretty much it, I think. The objects you can see there as well. The number of objects in this case is 1, so I don't need to change that. If there were more objects, then you'd have to create the objects. So once that's all done, we're almost ready to export. The next thing that we need to do is run a little bit of code, which is the last piece of code that we also showed in the downloads. And this piece of code will convert AGD4.6 script into a 4.7 script so that it can be read easily. So basically, to do that, I've created a little file. Again, it's very straightforward. All you have to do, and this is why you have to do it in Spectaculator, is run this file called 64768 and convert files, and click execute after import. Now before you do this, save the game, because this is going to freeze it. It's going to actually freeze the game, so make sure you save it before you do that. And if you need to go back to it, just in case you need to, if you've forgotten something, so save it at that point. Okay, but I don't need to. I know that I'm doing fine. So all I have to do now then is read off these two numbers here, 48350 and 11856, and you'll be pleased to know this is the last piece of data that we need to export. So we've now done that, and we'll save it here, and we'll call it dfb main data.bin. So there we go. So with the font and the sprites and the map and the jump table and finally the full data, we've pretty much got it covered there now. Now, as I said, running that code will freeze, so you'd have to load it in again if you wanted to. But what I'm going to do here is just use the Windows snipping tool, and I'll use that to basically just grab a copy of this screen here, so that I can just refer to it, and that's an easy alternative if you don't want to have a second copy open at the same time. So that's what I'm going to do. You can run it how you wish, of course. If you want to have two copies open, that's perfectly fine as well, as long as you can reference them. So let's switch over now. Here we are in AGDX, and we're going to load the data in. So step by step, it's almost the same process, just in reverse. It's a little bit more involved in terms of setting up the pointers, but other than that, it's fairly painless. So let's begin with loading in the font, of course, as we did with the previous version. So we'll go to the font here. Remember, as before, open the char set and simply load the font in from the menu. So go to here, open, import machine code, and there you go, that's done. So that's stage one done anyway. Okay, so now let's move on. We can also look at, just make sure that's fine. Yeah, okay, fine. So next thing we can do then is we can think about the next piece of data. So let's move down to the sprites here, and what we're going to have to do here is create the same number of sprites so that they occupy the same amount of memory. So you don't have to recreate exactly the sort of frame setup, but you do have to create the correct number of sprites. And as you can see here, frames 88 and 17 sprites. So we need to create first of all 17 sprites, so that's pretty quick and easy to do. And as I said, then you need to create the correct number of frames, but you don't need to match them up, the sprites with the frames. As long as you've got the right number, the data will be correct. So now we just have to go through the task of creating all the frames, which is a little bit of a drag, but it's not too much hassle. Could potentially be done with a poke, but I had a few issues with that, so I found that the best thing to do is just to basically save the trouble of that and just create the correct number, because it doesn't really take that long. So we want 88, so that should be there you go. And as you can see, double check 11298, that is correct, that's the right size as we calculated. So now we can load the sprites in. That's going to be pretty straightforward. Go to our file, we know where to load it in, we load it in at 36944, and that's pretty straightforward. and that should be our sprites in there. Press S 3 times, and then we can see our screen, and yep, no problems. So that's the sprites done. Good, that's another box ticked. Right then, let's load the map, since that was the bit that we saved after that. That's easy, very straightforward. It's at 36844 now, and we know it's 88 bytes, so we just load the map in. There it is, and load that in, and make sure we've got the right address. There we go, and so that's done. Obviously we can't really check the map yet. We don't really want to, because we want to load the data in first. So let's just double check how many blocks. So we can see there 203. I could have checked my notepad there as well. So this new version of AGDX doesn't have a prompt when you create a block, so it's a lot easier to create a huge amount of blocks. You just have to hold the key down. So let's create the correct number of these. Okay, and there we go. It's actually 202, block 202, so it's 203. Good, so that data is correct. Now, remember what I said before about the window. You must remember, before you create the screens, to set up the window. This is very important, because obviously if you get that wrong, you'll have to delete the screens again, and that'll probably create all kinds of corruption and different problems. You'll have to go back to the start almost certainly. So make sure that you create the screen in the correct position. And I know, although I didn't show it in the video, I know that this is the actual setup for this game. So at this point you need to create the screen, and once that's done, we're then ready to adjust the pointers, well, create the screens and adjust the pointers. So we now know we need to create those 17 screens. So again, straightforward, go into here and just create the number of screens that we want. Okay, and that's done. And so once we've done that, let's also create the correct number of sounds. That's there. Okay, the objects we know is already done, sprites is already done, and text we'll do that a little bit later, because it's a bit of a pain to do, and so we'll use a poke for that. Okay, so the right numbers are in there now. All we need to do, oops, just make sure that's 2030. All we need to do now is use the arrow keys and the plus and minus key on the keyboard to recreate the correct space, to reserve the amount of space that we need. So we need 6017. So we'll do that. We can go up in increments of 100 like this, and we just keep going. So obviously this part is going to take a little bit of a while, so what I'll do is I'll basically skip ahead and come back to you when I've basically created all of the correct settings for the memory. So let's skip ahead, and here we go, we're back. So here's the copy that I made, and you can see here that I've made the correct adjustments for the events and for the text and for everything else that's required. So now looking at it, you should see that all these numbers here, don't need to worry about the first numbers, but the second numbers, you can see they all match, 2030, 6017, and so on. They all match up, and that basically means that finally we're now ready to import the last piece of data, and that will import our blocks, our screens, events, sounds, positions, objects, and text all together. So yeah, let's go and open the data here, and we need to load it in at 48242, which is the start of the block data here, 48242. So basically we just put that in there, 48242. Make sure that execute after import isn't ticked if you set it from before. Okay, and we should now see that the blocks are all in, which is great. and the screens are all in, equally good. We can just do a little check, maybe check the sprite positions, and yes, it's all looking fine, isn't it? Great. Okay, so there's just a couple of other little things that you have to do now to finalize and make everything work. Just check the scripts. Yep, scripts are all okay as well. So just double check that everything has worked. And then we just need to finalize a few little pieces at the end. So one of the things that you'll need to do is set the start position for the map, which hasn't been set. So we will basically choose and press X, and that will set the start position if necessary. Following this, you'll recall that we haven't actually set the number of messages. So we're going to do this by a poke, because basically it's just a pain to create messages. You have to open them and then write something and save it and so on. So what we'll do is we'll just poke it in here. There are 4 and it's 32020, and we'll poke it with 4. So remember the number of messages that you've got in your game and do the poke. You may then need to redefine the keys, because the keys will have been set by the default AGD. And I think that is pretty much everything. So we've done block, screens, events, sounds, we've done the map. We didn't need to do the jump table, we did the positions, objects, and so on. And as you can see, finally the game is there. So obviously I went through this quite slowly. You can probably get the whole thing done in about 10 minutes. It's not a obviously it's not just a one-click thing, but it does work. And obviously it will set the games up ready for being imported into the newer version of AGDX that I've got planned with the sprite savings and so on. So yeah, that's basically how you do it. I may look at getting some even older games to work with this system. I don't really see any reason why it shouldn't work. As you can see here, we've got the sprites. We can check the animations there. It's quite nice little animations that Andrew did here. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I know there are some really nice AGD4.6 games that that people are keen to sort of upgrade, and you know, with the memory savings, that's certainly going to be possible. And so that's really the reason I like to do this kind of thing, then, to see people doing that, and then of course we get more games and the whole thing keeps growing, which is great. Okay, well, thanks a lot again, everybody. Hope you found this useful. And I look forward to seeing some conversions and improvements to some of these older games that can be resurrected. And I'll keep on programming and looking at some new additions as well. Okay, so as always, take care, keep enjoying AGD, and happy coding. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.